Hi, I'm Harry Rock, and welcome to another edition of the Westfield Council on Aging Presents. This is a collaborative effort with Mike Squindo, Executive Director of the Westfield Senior Center, Tina Gorman, COA Special Projects Coordinator, and Pete Coles, producer of WCPC Westfield Cable Channel 15. Our topic today is falls prevention, and our guest is the one and only, someone that everybody knows here, the great, the talented, the amazing Tina Gorman, Council on Aging Special Projects Coordinator. We're going to be discussing falls, why they're problematic, and why they're of great concern to all of us seniors, especially in these slippery times. So, Tina, welcome to the show.
Thank you. What an introduction. I don't know if I can live up to all that.
No, I know. I don't think there's any problem with that. And it's always, I always have great delight when you're on the show with me because you're the one that's usually scripting this thing behind the scenes. You're what people don't realize is that the topics and all the guests come to me from Tina.
Yep.
And I just then put together an interview and we work it from there. But it's always nice to have you on that side of the table,
Thank you.
You're usually sitting where I'm sitting.
It is. It's nice to be on this side of the table.
But we have a fascinating topic today, and when you first mentioned it to me, I'm thinking falls. Okay, yeah, that's slips and falls, and trip on.
We'll talk about this for 5 minutes.
Yeah,
right?
we'll talk about this for 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. But what I really discovered as I started thinking about it and got into some of the notes that you had sent me is it's a far more complex topic than I had ever expected. And we think it's always related to the horrible weather conditions we've had. We've had ice and snow and things of that nature. And we all know that people have had, if they take a fall, so often we hear people, they're breaking a hip and now they're laid up for a considerable amount of time in a hospital or at home. That can develop into other health issues.
Absolutely.
And it can become a real problem. So when we think about falls, it's really a more comprehensive topic, and that's what we're going to get in today so that you're well informed. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that you are safe in your own home and when you move around town. So, Tina, I think we should first, what is a fall? Let's start. I mean, you think it's, I know what that is, but what is a fall as opposed to anything else that people would relate to?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of different ways that people fall. Sometimes they sort of crumple. Sometimes they fall forward. Sometimes they lose their balance. Sometimes people will say to me, I fell and broke my hip. And my question to them is, did you fall and break your hip, or did you break your hip and fall? So that would be a pathological fracture where the hip actually breaks first. It might be because of osteoporosis.
That's interesting.
And the person goes down. And I actually had that experience very early on in my career. I was working in a continuing care retirement community. I was in the nursing home portion. I was walking behind a woman who was in her 90s, who I heard the snap, and then she went down. She actually broke her hip first and then fell. So lots of different ways that people fall. Some, are you falling down a flight of stairs? Are you falling off of a ladder? Are you falling from standing up? Did you just kind of take maybe a little tumble where it wasn't that big a deal? You were, sitting on maybe you were even sitting on the floor and just kind of lost your balance sitting and went down. Well, that's, so there are lots of different kinds of falls. And, I want to point out, Harry, that one of the reasons that I wanted to do this presentation this month is because during the month of March at the Senior Center, as many people know, we really highlight our Retire the Fire program, which is a fire prevention and safety program that we started back in 2013. So we're in year number 12 now. And the Massachusetts Department of Fire Services has really been focusing on preventing falls, especially in older adults, because they see this as a real problem. I mean, if you look at the statistics, 1 in 4 people over the age of 65 will have a fall this year.
Yeah, that's pretty high.
It's a high number.
Right.
And I think the reason that the Department of Fire Services is paying so close attention to this is that, you have a fall, who are you calling? You're calling 911. It's all first responder, EMS.
Right.
And then as you pointed out, Harry, it can really set off this chain of events with Oftentimes, it's a broken bone. It might be a broken hip. It could be a broken wrist. We've had a lot of people with broken wrists. It could be a dislocated shoulder. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything quite as severe as that, but oftentimes it is, depending on where the fall occurred, how the fall occurred. So we're going to talk about all of that. I was on a special task force for the state several years ago on falls prevention and really looking at the whole picture. And you and I are going to talk about I break it down into sort of two categories, the person and the environment. So what can we as individuals do personally to help prevent falls? And then what can we do within our environment to help prevent falls? And if we do all of those things, hopefully we'll all be better off.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about that, but they are two separate entities.
Right.
And it's all
Right.
about what
And I think most people, when they think falls, they think as you did. We live in New England. We've had an icy winter, and that's what's causing the falls. Well, that's environmental. And that definitely is part of it. And there are certainly things that we do.
Right.
I think we're really conscious of some of those kinds of things, but less conscious maybe about some of the personal things that we need to pay attention to.
Right. So let's jump into that.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of things that people should be aware of.
Yeah.
And the good news is that many falls can be prevented.
Absolutely.
And I think, let's just talk about, eyesight, hearing, reflexes, things of that nature.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start with eyesight because, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the eye problems that people experience as they age are eye problems that happen gradually. So it's what we call an insidious onset. It means it happens gradually, sometimes so gradually that you're not really aware there's a problem. So, people who have cataracts, people who have glaucoma. Glaucoma is called the sneak thief of sight. And the reason it's called the sneak thief of sight is because you don't realize it's happening. You start losing your peripheral vision, but it's so gradual that you don't necessarily know what's happening. Same thing with cataracts. I mean, people don't wake up and all of a sudden, my vision is so blurry. Cataracts happen over time. They get denser, they get thicker, and people lose more eyesight. So unless you're seeing your eye doctor on a regular basis, which is what we would really encourage, you're not necessarily going to know that. And sometimes people go to the doctor. It also could be your prescription. You wear glasses or you wear contact lenses and, you need a new prescription. And over time that changes.
Right.
And how many people who I've said, oh my God, I went to the eye doctor. I didn't even realize, when did you start coloring your hair? I didn't even realize it. It's just like this. And so you can imagine that absolutely is going to affect maybe things that you're not seeing, that you're going to trip over, or a curb that was in your peripheral vision, you didn't really notice that. So definitely, that's to me, that's sort of one of the most basic, sort of simplest places to start. And the same thing with hearing. Hearing for falls is just, you're outside, maybe you don't hear the car coming. Especially with some of the newer cars, they're quieter. Some of the electric cars are quieter. So things like that, or you don't hear somebody say, hey, look out. And that's happened. That's happened at the senior center. It's like, oh, watch out, watch out. There's, somebody coming with a wheelchair or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
They didn't hear me, so they weren't watching out, and, down you go.
Yeah,
So,
that's a great point. You were talking about glasses. When I didn't start wearing glasses until I was well into my 40s. And so I finally was going from cheaters to full, okay, Harry, just bite the bullet, let's get something. And these are progressives. When I first got them, I could not.
Right.
I couldn't see.
Right.
I could not, if I was walking in tricky foot terrain, I actually would take these off, even though it was fuzzy, because I wasn't used to them.
Right.
And so to your point, you've really got to get used to having glasses on your face and the changing prescriptions and how they line up, because these are progressive. So depending on where I look,
it's
certain
different.
things are in focus.
Yes, absolutely. It takes people some time to get used to that.
Right.
And we usually recommend that if you get a new prescription, especially if it's very different than the one that you've had, use it around the house first. Try to get used to it a little bit before you go out before you venture into the yonder land over there. That's really important. And it's the same thing with contact lenses. Any of those things. It's like there is an adjustment period. So. And
the other thing that happens to me, and I'm sure everybody out there that has prescription sunglasses has had occur to them. It happens to me all the time. I'll be wearing them in the car, I forget to switch off when
Right.
I'm going inside to a
Right.
store or into the house.
Yep.
Next thing I know, I'm in there. I don't have my other glasses with me. They're in the car.
Yeah.
And now I'm going into a darkened
And everything's
environment.
dark, right? And it's like, I
Right. And
can't,
so you've
you know.
got to be really careful with that as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about hearing. You actually mentioned hearing, so we've really talked about that.
Yeah.
But let's get into conditions of
Yeah.
diabetes, heart disease problems,
Yeah.
physical conditions that can relate to
Falls.
people falling.
Yeah. All right. So heart conditions, diabetes, problems with your thyroid, nerve damage. Because a lot of times when you see nerve damage, it'll start peripherally. So it'll be in your fingers and toes and feet.
Right.
Any of those things can affect your balance. And of course, with diabetes, it's not just your balance. Diabetes will often also affect your vision. So again, we've got that two-pronged. So for any of those conditions, you really should be under a doctor's care. And when I say that, and I know it's challenging in this day and age with a shortage of doctors, but under a doctor's care to where, you're seeing your doctor on a regular basis, whether it's for your annual physical or you're in touch with your medical provider, whether it's a doctor, a nurse practitioner, physician assistant, just kind of monitoring those conditions because all of those can affect your balance. I mean, if you're experiencing pain in your feet or that tingling, a lot of people will describe it as like a burning or a tingling. Well, that's affecting your balance because, then you're kind of favoring your feet and, maybe not bending them as much as you normally would. And because you're in some pain, well, guess what? It's tricky to keep your balance when you have that kind of problem going on.
Right.
So any of those conditions, and of course, any of the conditions like, if you're somebody with a history of like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease, all of those obviously can affect balance as well. So, you want to be under the care of a medical provider and letting that provider know. I mean, one of the things that's somewhere on this laundry list of things we're going to talk about is if you do have a fall, even if you don't break anything, even if you don't necessarily bruise anything, it's really important to let your medical provider know that you've had that fall or that you're having multiple falls because they have to try to tease out exactly why is that happening.
Right.
And you can kind of say, does it seem to be at certain times of the day? Is it after you've taken medication? We'll talk about all of those kinds of things, but it is important, even if you don't break a bone or get seriously injured, to let your medical provider know if you're having some problems with falls.
In prepping for this with some of the notes that you had sent me ahead of time as I was really starting to think about this topic, hadn't even thought about, conditions that we put on ourselves that can create a fall, like just simple as going to the bathroom because of medical issues.
Yep. Yeah. So anything like, people who experience incontinence, people who are on diuretics. I mean, the whole idea behind a diuretic is to get fluid out of your body.
Right.
And I have not had the personal pleasure of ever being on a diuretic, but I worked with a physician many years ago. And he had a heart condition. And he said periodically his cardiologist would put him on a diuretic. And he said, Tina, the thing that I can tell you about that is when you get that urge that you have to urinate, you have about 5 seconds to get to a bathroom. So the chances of a fall, the increased chances of a fall, that will happen anytime you're rushed. Anytime it's anything that becomes sort of urgent and rushed,
Right.
because now you really kind of can't take your time. So, but even if you're not on a diuretic, and even if you're not incontinent, it's just like, well, I really, I have to use the restroom. Well, I'll wait for a while. And then sometimes, you put it off, I do it. You're in the middle of doing something.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, well now, you've got to sort of run. If you're an older person, maybe who uses a walker, maybe just somebody who's a little bit slower with any mobility problems, you've kind of created a crisis where there didn't need to be one.
Right.
And some people will, if they do have issues with incontinence, what they'll do is they'll toilet themselves like every few hours, even if they don't necessarily have to, have the urge to go. But it's like, okay, I went at noon, it's 2:00. And that's like preventive medicine. We're trying to trying to avert a crisis.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think everybody can relate to that, and I can think of a lot of situations I've been in where all of a sudden the need comes and you are rushing.
Absolutely.
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about medications because medications obviously are a significant source and reason
They
for
are.
causing people to fall.
They are. And that's one of the reasons why we see so many more falls in older adults than we do in younger adults, is because older adults tend to be on more medications. So first of all, some medications will just cause problems with balance. I mean, they and it'll say right on the thing, this medication may cause dizziness. Well, there's your, you're a little dizzy, you're a little off balance. The more medications someone is on, the more likely that they're going to have balance problems and dizziness, whether it's just because of the volume, the interactions between medications, sort of interacting with each other. And I mean, I've worked with people that are on 8, 10, a dozen different medications. Now, you put all those together, not that they're taking them all at one time, some in the morning, some with a meal, some at lunch, some before dinner, some before bed. So all of those things can really increase the chances of a fall. So what we usually recommend to people is, again, this is why it's important for your medical provider to know that you're falling, so that they can kind of look at, is it because of medications? Is it because of the interaction of medications? Is it that maybe you're taking a medication that causes fatigue? It doesn't even have to necessarily be dizziness, but when you're really tired and you just kind of can't get out of your own way, guess what? You're more susceptible to a fall. So sometimes the physician can lower the dosage. Sometimes they can take the person off the medication altogether. It may be the timing of it. Okay, instead of taking this at noontime, let's have you take it before you go to bed, because you're going to be lying down anyway. So all of that is really important, but medications are a huge source of can be a huge source of problems. They're lifesavers, and they can be wonderful. And for some people, they have to be on whatever they're on, with the dosage. So then it's a matter of sort of managing those and having an understanding that I'm taking these 2 or 3 meds together. They kind of can make me feel a little lightheaded or a little woozy or a little dizzy. So it's knowing that, and then trying to take some action steps around that.
So to that point, should people be thinking about meeting with their physicians if they are feeling a lot of side effects to maybe change
always
when you take it or how much you're taking? Or
always. Because the other thing that happens is, as much as we love to feel like everything is centralized, and Dr. A, specialist over here who put me on this, and Dr. B, specialist here in my primary care, as much as we like to hope and think that they're all on the same page, it doesn't necessarily happen.
That's true.
So what we've told, and I know I have Dr. Akinelli Lovelace is on my show. My Wake Up Wednesday show is a regular once a month, and he and I have had this conversation on multiple occasions. When you go to see your primary care, take all your medications, stick them in a brown paper bag, because you're not going to remember all the names. For a lot of the seniors, it's like, I take the blue pill, the yellow pill, the white pill. I get it, the horse pill, the tiny pill. We get all of that. And any over-the-counters that you're taking, because that's the other thing. Are you taking other things? Well, I have a Tums every night before I go to bed, or I take Advil a couple times a week because I'm prone to headache, whatever it is, or vitamins, supplements. Put them all in a bag, take them in there, so that your physician, your primary care, can look at the whole gamut and say, okay, what do we have going on here? I mean, I had it years and years ago, and when I say years ago, I'm talking about like 40 years ago, when I early in the field. I was working in the same facility where the woman had the broken hip, and I had a woman who was seeing a psychiatrist on a regular basis, and it just seemed like every time she went to see the psychiatrist, he would change her medication. And so, this was back in the day, way before, computerized everything. This was like back in the 80s. And so, thankfully we had a director of nursing who was on top of it, because that was not the only medication this woman was taking. She was in her 80s, so she was on other meds. And so it was really the director of nursing who was constantly looking at, looking for side effects, because she lived there. It was a long-term care facility. What are the side effects? And there always were side effects. So she'd be on the phone, a week later with the psychiatrist saying, first of all, stop changing the medication because it takes it takes your body a while to get, to get used to it. And second of all, you need to understand she's on this, and this in addition to what you're putting her on. So really important. That's communication. That's really important to communicate with, again, whoever the medical provider is. You may be seeing the nurse practitioner early on in the appointment. Your time with the primary care may be 5 minutes, but you've got other time with other medical professionals that you can start going over all this with.
And I think to your point, I think it is rare, if ever, that when you go into a doctor's office now that one of the first questions they ask after they get your name and your social security number is, what medications are you on?
Absolutely.
So thankfully, I could never come up with the names. Ann is always the one that goes to the drugstore for me, to the pharmacy to get our medications. But, have at least, I love the idea of putting them all in a bag.
Yeah.
Or at least have a little note card with them all written out. Make sure they're updated. With the dosage, how often you take it, but you're going to need to have that information, so make sure you have it readily available. So great tips. And again, make sure that you know what the side effects are. And I do make sure that if I'm picking up something new at the pharmacy, I ask them, what are the side effects?
I think that's really important, Harry, and I'm glad that you brought that up because my biggest concern is that, and I do the same thing, I ask the pharmacist, what should I be looking out for? Because they give you everything in writing, but you need, it's microscopic. You need a magnifier of,
Easy to miss it.
Oh my goodness. I've had people say to me, Tina, they gave me the information, but I can't see it. Even with my glasses on, it's, because they're trying to jam all this information on. So ask the pharmacist, what are the big things that I should be looking out for that I should be careful about, that are possible side effects. They'll give you just the, like a short laundry list of the major ones. So.
And generally, not so much if you're getting the pickup, but if you go inside, they'll bring the pharmacist right over to you and talk to you. So really make sure people are doing that. Let's talk about mild cognitive impairment and certain types of dementia as far as how does that affect higher risk of falling?
Well, you'd be surprised. But first of all, with mild cognitive, so if you have someone, say, in the earlier stages of dementia or Alzheimer's, sometimes for them, it's more that they spend a lot of time searching in their mind for familiarity, so something that's familiar. So I think a lot of times when people have falls, it's because they're not focused on what they should be paying attention to. And when someone has, in the earlier stages of dementia, it's just hard to focus because they're so focused on just the day-to-day activities and sort of staying on track with things because it's more of a struggle for them. They really have to think about things that they may not be paying attention to, the chair that's over there or the ottoman that I'm about to trip over. So that's what you find with, I think, more with the mild cognitive impairments where you have people that are less focused than they normally would have been. As someone gets if the dementia progresses, it's very interesting. Like with Alzheimer's disease, there are certain visual changes that happen. So, for instance, a person's depth perception changes when they have Alzheimer's.
Really?
Yes. And so one of the ways that if you have somebody who wanders, for instance, and you want to keep them in a space and not, say, wander outside, one of the things that we've used is you can get like black duct tape, and if you put that across a doorway and you make it about, say as wide as this piece of paper, all right, to someone with Alzheimer's disease dementia, that looks like a canyon. If you watch them, they'll actually pick up their leg to go over it because they think it's like a big hole, okay, and so they're really cautious that way. So if you make that wider, they won't cross that threshold, because their depth perception is off. So they don't know that it's just one dimensional. It's just like it's a piece of tape, or it's painted, or it's a different color tile.
Right.
So they use those in memory care units. You'll see like different colored tiles in different places. And that's so that we don't, it's just a form.
Did not realize that.
And so, but what happens, Harry, is that when your depth perception is off and you've got, say, dementia or Alzheimer's, if you're going up and down the stairs, it's really easy to fall because the steps may appear either higher or lower.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, so you go to, hit the last step and you're thinking it's just this little, and it's a higher step, and down you go. So so there are some definite changes that happen with people with cognition.
Yeah, and obviously that's occurring more and more often now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about loss of muscle mass. This was really interesting to me.
It is. It's really important. So as people age, lots of things happen to them physically, as you know, Mr. YMCA over here. But older adults often experience what we call sarcopenia, which is a loss of muscle mass. Well, it's like anything else. Even in a younger person, they break their arm goes in a cast. The arm is in the cast for, say, 6 weeks. You take it out of the cast, it looks smaller and different than the other arm. Why? Because you've been using your other arm, and now it's been doing double duty because you can't use this one. And that's what happens when you don't exercise your muscles. They shrink. I mean, you have a loss of muscle mass. Same thing with bone density. So the more stress that you put on your bones, actually, the denser they become. So that's a good thing. Less porous, and both of those problems can lead to falls. So, and what's ironic about this, Harry, is that I've heard so many older people say, "Well, I don't want to exercise. I'm afraid I'll fall." And of course, that's only exacerbating the problem, because the less they exercise, the more muscle mass they're losing, and the greater the chance that they will fall because they don't, And the other thing too, and Carol Palmer is also she's a group exercise instructor at the senior center, but also is a regular on my show. And, we've talked about that too, and just exercises that are done for balance to help improve balance. So, things like yoga and Tai Chi and Pilates, all of those are helpful with balance. And, it's really interesting. I'm in my late 60s, and I certainly see a difference. I mean, I'm religious about doing my stretches and my core work every morning for about a half an hour. There is no doubt that my balance has changed since I'm younger. So some of those exercises and stretches where I'm holding onto one leg, standing on one leg, I used to do that. I was a dancer. I could do that no problem. Now I have to have a hip or something up against the wall, because I do them first thing in the morning too. And I find that, getting out of bed and starting to do that right away, it's really easy to lose your balance. So, the more you exercise, probably, certainly you're going to build your muscle mass and your bone density. But also your balance is chances are that your balance is going to improve as well. So don't get caught up in that, that catch-22 of, I'm afraid to exercise, I'm afraid to move, because that's what happens. People will sometimes end up sitting like in a chair because they're afraid, well, I'm going to fall if I get up. Well, the problem is that at some point you're going to have to get up, and then the chances that you're going to fall, you've really increased those chances because you haven't sharpened any of those senses. You haven't been using your muscles and your bones and so forth.
Yeah, I think I see that an awful lot where people really do just sit, and you know that the muscles are getting weaker, they're atrophying.
The worst thing.
And you've got to use them. You've got to keep them as strong as you can, because we all do. I'm surprised at how much muscle mass I've lost, and I'm approaching my mid-70s now. But from where I was, because I was always worked out.
Absolutely.
I was very athletically inclined through all my adult years, and I can certainly see a lack of muscle mass, but also my balance too. To your point. I notice little things that all of a sudden, it's not as sharp. It doesn't take much for all of a sudden I can correct it very quickly.
Yeah.
But I'm having to correct it.
Yeah.
So those things do go. And are there things that you can do to improve that, or
there are? I mean, there are.
Or is that just a natural part of aging?
I think the balance piece of it. Well, again, it's hard to tease it out because most people, when they hit, say, 70, are probably on at least one medication. So is that part of it? Is it? I mean, I think that you know what I mean.
Yeah,
there's a lot going on.
Right.
I think in general, and this is an Aunt Jane story. So no data. My brother, who's a chemist, would say, "Show me the data." But I think in general, people, your balance does become an issue. And I have a lot of people. We'll talk about the environment in a few minutes, but I have a lot of people who will not climb up on even a step stool if they are alone in the house, and that is not a bad practice in my
Yeah,
opinion.
no,
You just need to be
absolutely.
really
You shouldn't
careful.
be getting on anything like that unless you have another person. Um, let's talk about there's some balance and strength training exercises out there that people can get
Yeah,
themselves
absolutely.
involved in.
Yeah, any of the senior centers, one of our goals is to keep people as physically active as possible and to do it as affordably as possible. So I think any of your local senior centers, and we've said this before, I've said it on this show, and I've talked to people individually, you don't have to just attend programs at the senior center where you live. So, for instance, Friday mornings we have line dancing at our senior center, which, by the way, that is a great balance builder because you're moving, you're turning, but it's meant for the ones that we run are meant for older people. So you're not spinning like this, but
Right.
you're doing those gentle turns. Well, the line dancers are in Westfield on Wednesday, in Southwick on another day, in Agawam on another day, and there's nothing to lots of them. Oh, I do line dancing 3 days a week. I'm here, and I'm here. That's perfectly okay. So if there are programs that we don't offer in Westfield that maybe you hear about in West Springfield or Agawam or Southwick or wherever, that's fine. You can participate. We have some out-of-towners that participate in ours. But I think, we are very lucky in Westfield. I mean, you've got a YMCA. You have the senior center. And, the programs that are offered are like with the Y, it's the active older adults program. And
Yeah.
those programs are designed for older adults. Same thing with the senior center. We have chair yoga. We have, Carol Palmer teaches her totally fun fitness class. We have Zumba Gold, 2 different instructors. And those instructors, our mail call class, will say, you have to do it to what works for you. So not everybody in any of those classes is at the same level. Their age ranges are from 60 to 95 and their abilities are all different. And, sometimes people have had a hip replacement or a knee replacement and they're coming back after that. So, but those are available to people. During COVID, thankfully, with the help of Pete Coles, we started that's how the Council on Aging Presents series started. So we started the educational piece, the fitness piece, and the entertainment piece. And I am really proud to say, as the Special Projects Coordinator, who works closely with Pete, that we kept up all of those programs after COVID. So, Channel 15, great resource. There are exercise programs on Channel 15 every day. The listing is in our newsletter. You'll find it on page 6 of the newsletter of what's offered when. Our Voice of Experience newsletter, the March edition just came out. And it's interesting. I have one of my tax aid folks, Sue Graney, helps prepare taxes for people. She said to me, I had a call her about something a couple weeks ago. She answered the phone and she said, "Do you hear your husband in the background?" And I'm thinking to myself, what is my husband doing at Susan Graney's house? And then I realized she because he did an exercise program with my daughter Grace, she still does that at least 2 to 3 days a week. It's offered
So
on
she's
Channel
still watching
15.
and listening
She's
to
still doing it. And those programs we have line dancing, we have chair yoga,
Yeah,
Carol Palmer,
right.
we have mail call, we have yoga, we have all of them. Turn on Channel 15 or it's all YouTube. If you want to do it on YouTube, just follow along. And they were all designed for you to do in your own home.
Yeah.
And so those are important. But in this day and age with YouTube, you want to try doing, chair yoga and you've done ours and you want to try something else, YouTube it, and do it. So for me in this day and age, Harry, there's just no reason not to be doing something.
Yeah, good for you.
yeah.
Yeah, no, you're very right. So let's talk about healthy bones because, as you mentioned, that won't stop a fall, but it may
help.
It may help.
It may help that you don't have
from breaking a bone.
Yes, exactly.
So let's
That's
talk
exactly
about
it.
what makes a healthy bone.
Okay, so bones are if you don't stress a bone, it will naturally become porous. So what that means is it's filled with air as opposed to bone density. So women are more prone to osteoporosis, so they have to be really careful about that. There are bone density tests, so you can be tested for that to kind of see where you fall on the spectrum. Some people are more prone to porous bones. And so any physical activity where you're stressing your bones, it just builds up your bone strength. And we have plenty of people that have taken a tumble at the senior center and we're fine. They were a little bruised. They didn't break anything. Mostly people who are in pretty good shape. And when I say pretty good shape, Harry, I don't mean you don't need to be out running a marathon.
Right,
you don't need to be running at all.
Right.
Find what works for you, whether it's,
Right.
but whatever you do, and you and I have talked about this 1,000 times, you
Yep.
have to be consistent. Going out and saying, well, I'm going to take up running or I'm going to take up jogging and, doing it for 2 weeks. Okay, that's great, but okay, then you're done. You know what I mean? Whatever you do, you have to sustain it.
It's
And you
gotta
don't have
be
to do the same
sustainable.
thing. You do lots of different things using
Right.
lots of different muscles in your body. But the point is that the better shape that you're in, the less likely that a spill or a fall is really going to do serious damage. And that's our goal, of course, is to prevent the fall from happening in the first place.
Right.
But if it does happen, that you're going to walk away from it and say, well, I'm a little sore, but I'll live, I'll survive.
Yeah, and it's going to keep you from ending up in a hospital or nursing home
Yeah.
stay or long-term disability or anything worse.
And sometimes that is really the difference. And it's kind of harsh and sort of sad to say, but in some cases that is the difference between someone remaining at home,
Right.
fairly independent, maybe with some support services, and ending up in a long-term care facility, either on a short-term or a longer-term basis.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
Let's talk about calcium and vitamin D.
Yep.
How and why is that important?
I think that's definitely something that while you're reviewing all of your medications with your medical provider, that is definitely a conversation to have with your medical provider. Because, again, any of those supplements can be wonderful, but your medical provider is going to look at everything else you're taking. Some medications actually deplete calcium. So, you want to make sure. But again, that's a conversation to have with your medical provider, not with your neighbor, not with your friend who may have all kinds of advice, but with your
Right.
medical provider to say, am I a candidate for, taking vitamin D or taking a calcium supplement? What do you think? Some doctors will say, oh, yep, absolutely. I want to put you on a low dosage. Some may say, nope, you don't need it based on, sometimes it's diet. We had Jen DeFune on the show this morning talking about a registered dietitian. Jen would be the one to say, well, you don't necessarily need a calcium supplement if you're upping certain foods that, are calcium friendly. So
Right.
conversations to have with your medical, medical
no
provider.
question about it. And, just to go back again to, bone density is it's all about, certainly resistance exercises. And
Yep.
you can do that in a lot of different fashions
Yeah.
and ways, whether it's
Yep.
at home, at the
Yep.
senior center, at the Y. But also, can you talk just about, when we talk about active exercise, how often and for how long? Duration. So really, you look at duration, intensity, and there's really 3 parts to it. There's duration, intensity, and frequency.
Okay.
Those 3 pieces.
Well, according to my primary care physician source, who is Dr. Lovelace,
And he's very good, by the way. I listened to him.
He is very good, and also just most of what you read, mostly for older adults, it'll say 150 minutes a week. So 150 minutes to me, I would break that down to about 30-minute segments 5 times a week.
Perfect.
At least. I mean, that's your,
Yep.
that's sort of your minimum. And I think if you can target that, to me, that's a realistic goal, because if I say to you, well, Harry, you have to exercise 3 hours a day, like for the rest of your life, you'll do that once or twice and say, okay, I can't do this,
Yeah, that's-
and
it's
you
not
just throw up.
sustainable.
It's not sustainable. But
Right.
30 minutes, it's like, okay, well, how long does it take me to walk around my neighborhood, or how long does it take me, and of course you
Right.
do want to mix it up. So you want some aerobic types of exercise, you want some stretches, you want some strength training, maybe some weight training if that's something that you want to do. One of the things that I love about Carol Palmer's Totally Fun Fitness class, and the reason that we came up with that name is because it's sort of the total package. So there's a little bit of everything. There's some warm-ups, there's cool down, there's stretches, there's some balance, there's some aerobics, there's some strength training. And I think that's, and of course, if you can do something like that with a class, it's generally a lot more fun than doing it
Yeah,
on your own.
it is.
You know, although some people like the solitude. Like I actually kind of prefer running on my own because I solve all of the world's problems, all of my own family
It is,
problems.
yeah, it's a chance to clear your head out
It
and
is.
really
And
think.
I can't run and chat at the same time. So if I'm running with someone, I'll say to them right out of the gate, if you want to talk, I'm happy to listen. I'll listen for the whole time we're out here running, but I can't run and talk at the same time for any length of time.
I'm the same way, right? Not if you're stressing yourself.
yeah,
You're going out for a workout.
Right.
It's not a chance to sit down and talk about it.
Exactly.
Let's talk about foot problems
Yes.
because that obviously
Yeah.
that's the root of balance and the cause of why we fall a lot.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, and there's a number of factors to that.
Yeah, there are. So we talked a little bit before about like peripheral neuropathy, people who have, lack of feeling in their feet. And again, it goes back to, first, in some cases, that might be caused by diabetes, especially if you've been diabetic for a long period of time. Sometimes, and that's why diabetics always have to be concerned about checking their feet because they don't necessarily have great sensation in their feet. So they might not know, they might not see that they've got a sore on a toe or on the bottom of their foot, which can worsen because they don't feel it. So that's really important. Any type of foot problem, pain, you're going to want to get that checked out.
Yeah.
And it might be that you have to see a foot specialist. But the other thing it's really interesting to me, we had this conversation a couple of months ago at work, just among the staff, okay, so who are mostly in their 50s and 60s at this stage of the game, and mostly women. So we were talking about our footwear attire and the fact that all of us have pretty much traded in our pumps for comfort, and recognizing that we do have some balance issues.
You're right.
So, you want to wear, low-heeled, rubber-soled, non-skid shoes.
Yeah,
You have to be really careful about.
the same way, right?
I know. You have to be careful about high heels, shoes without backs, things like flip-flops in the summertime.
Yeah,
I know it's,
right.
and I mean, I've seen some of these women that come into the senior center wearing every kind of footwear, and I'm thinking that is like I'm just thinking to myself, it's an accident waiting to happen,
Yeah, it really is.
So you want to be really careful about that. But also, and I don't know if you remember doing this, Harry, but I can remember as a kid when we would get a new pair of shoes, especially like dress shoes, and the bottom of the soles were so smooth.
Oh, my
They were
gosh.
leather. They were so smooth.
I know.
We used to take sandpaper. My dad would give us sandpaper and we rub it on the bottom because until you kind of scuffed them up a little bit on the
Yeah.
bottom so you had some grip.
I always look for cement or asphalt to just
Right,
kind of
and just
scuff
kind
them
of swirl
because
around.
You're right, they're so slippery.
They're so slippery, and for our seniors,
Right.
that can be really scary. So you want to be careful about that. Another thing that you want to be really careful about, especially if you're a senior, is walking around in socks. Because socks, especially on the stairs, that
Oh
is
my gosh.
so dangerous.
Yeah.
So what we recommend is, in fact, it's so dangerous that I was working at a nursing home years ago, and the medical director was getting so tired of having people, we were getting these incidents reports of the residents getting out of bed at night to go to the bathroom and falling. He was so upset about that he banned wearing socks to bed because they were all wearing socks and they were sliding.
Yeah.
So I had to go to the defense of all these people because I said to him, but some people, I said, a lot of people just have really cold extremities because they're on blood thinners, they're on medications and so forth. So I said, that's not a solution. And I told him, I said, I wear socks to bed. This was 25 years ago. And I said to him, I can't not because my feet would be so cold I wouldn't be able to sleep. So the compromise was that we got those, the sock things, and they give them to you when you do day surgery with the grippies on the
grippy
bottom.
thing. I was just thinking about
And,
those.
I had a
Right.
senior who asked me, I did this presentation at the senior center several months ago, and she said, well, where can you get those? So now I've been on the lookout. You can get them at Walmart. You can get them like at TJ Maxx. You just have to, have to
Okay.
check. Not all of them. A lot of
Right.
those slipper socks don't have grippies,
Right.
but a lot of them do.
Right.
So just check the bottoms. And you know what my daughter did? Because we have an 18-month-old living with us. My granddaughter lives with us. Grace, and she's in the same boat. She was just learning how to walk and she was sliding all over the place. Grace took some kind of fabric paint, and dotted the bottom of all of her socks.
Oh my gosh.
And it just made a grip.
Right.
I would have never thought to do that. I came home one day and she had socks all over the kitchen table. And I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, Charlie's sliding all over the kitchen floor." So if it's good enough for a babe, we can do that. You can just take some socks and do that on the bottom.
That's a great point because, in our house, we have carpets. So when we come in the house, the shoes come off.
Yeah.
And so I'm walking around my socks and walks around in hers. But I do have slippers that I could slide my foot into.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that I'm not always going up and down the stairs and to your point, very, very slippery. I have to be very careful, make sure that hanging on the handrail. I actually walk sideways down the stairs so that I've got the full foot on the stair tread. But you've got, especially when it's a highly glossed, varnished type of stair tread, so you've got to be really, really careful.
Absolutely.
So Tina, we've covered a lot of ground here, a lot to falling. It's not just as simple as slipping on. And also be aware of your environment. We've got ice out there. You're walking inside buildings. People are tracking snow in, so you've got water on the floor, especially wax floors. That is very, very... So really make sure that you're pounding your feet before you walk into a building and try to get rid of all this snow and ice that you're carting in with you. Anything else that you can think of that we haven't talked about related to this topic?
Oh, yeah. I would say a few things. Number one, get enough sleep. Because when you're tired, it's that, that's going to increase your risk for falling. There's something that we haven't mentioned, that I haven't mentioned, Harry, and it's something called, sometimes people go from sitting to standing and they'll get dizzy, especially if they stand up suddenly.
I have that,
or if they're lying on the floor, the phone rings, you jump up to get it. That's called postural hypotension. It's where your blood pressure drops suddenly when you go from like a sit to a stand or lying down to sitting. That can be caused by medications. So that, again, is something that you want to let your medical provider know. Gee, every time I stand up, I get a little dizzy or a little woozy. Now, it may be that medication can be changed, but it also may be that it can't, and it's something that you're going to have to learn to live with. The key is, when you stand up, give yourself a little bit of time to get your balance, because it'll go away fairly quickly. But the idea is, don't jump up and start running or walking, because you're probably going to end up on your face, as opposed to stand up. Okay, let me get my bearings straight. And a lot of people, even Gary will say, my husband will say, "Oh, I jumped up too fast." Just get your bearings straight.
Can feel your head.
So just be really careful. If you're somebody who uses an assistive device, if you use a cane or a walker, we've talked about this before on the show, and you can go back. People can go back and YouTube the session that we did on medical equipment. Make sure that it's fit to you. So, people borrow medical, if they borrow walkers, if they borrow canes, especially if they've had a hospitalization, that's fine. But those are all adjustable. So make sure they're adjusted to you, to your height and to your weight, so that you're using it properly. Because, a cane is only good enough, or a walker is only good enough if you're using it properly. If you're not, it's not only going to probably help you to fall, but now you're like tripping over things. So you got to be really careful about that.
And to the point of getting up too soon, even when you're lying in bed, if you've been sleeping, I find that when I do get up, I sit on the side of the bed before I actually try to stand up.
Exactly. Dangle your feet.
Right.
We've talked all about the person. We need to spend a couple minutes talking about the environment and what you can do. We talked about outdoors, and people are pretty sensitive to that. My sidewalk is icy, my driveway is icy, so they're fairly cautious, I think, about that. Be careful of black ice, of course. But some of the things that people are not necessarily as careful about: clutter in your home. The more clutter that you have, the more likely to fall, especially on the stairs. And I see it all the time. People put things on their stairs because they don't want to make a trip up. And I get that. But instead of that, and then they forget they put it there. They go up, they come down, now they fall. Just the more stuff that people have. And, I've had students that have worked, done internships at the senior center. I've had students, the allied health students from here. And I say to them, when you come in, you've got backpacks and handbags and all that other stuff. Get it on a table, on a chair, or on the shelf. Do not put it on the floor, even if it's kind of toward the side, because that is like an accident waiting to happen.
Those are great tips.
Yeah, so that's really important. Dimly lit hallways and stairwells. Last year, we were giving out a lot of those automatic night lights. You can get them at Rockies. You can get them at Home Depot. You can get them at Stop and Shop, Big Y. They're the lights the night lights that you just plug them in.
Right.
They'll go off when it's bright, and when it gets darker, they'll automatically come on. They don't even have a light bulb in them. They just plug them in and they go.
Right.
So those are really helpful because a lot of times we see slip and fall at night. People get up to go to the bathroom.
Yep.
So we got two issues. We have the socks that are slippery, and we have a lack of lighting. And especially if people are married or they have a partner, they don't want to turn on the light and wake up the person in the room, and down they go. So be careful about that. Slippery shower stalls and tubs. Be really careful about that.
Brutal.
We had somebody who took, such a nasty fall last year or the year before. Was literally in the hospital, rehab for months, broke a lot of bones. You got to be really careful. Things like long electrical cords. You can't have long electrical cords where you can trip. And I would say the last thing is get rid of your scatter rugs. As beautiful as they are, get rid of your scatter rugs because you catch you catch a corner, you catch an edge, and down you're going.
Yeah. Tina Gorman, thank you so much for coming in. A fascinating conversation. And what I would say to people is be aware of everything that we have just gone over. Also recognize that this show broadcasts every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:45. So if you want to watch it again, to listen to some points that you might have missed, make sure that you do check it there. So certainly thanks to Tina Gorman, Council on Aging Special Projects Coordinator, and special thanks to Pete Coles, WCPC Westville Cable Channel 15, manager and producer, for his help and support to make this show possible. On behalf of Pete Coles, Mike Squindo, and Tina Gorman, I'm Harry Rock, and this has been another edition of the Westfield Council on Aging Presents. Have a great week, everybody. We will see you on the next show.